Welcome to the Fantastic Story Society, a place for the most unusual stories and storytellers, including your masters of ceremony, Max Tim and Scott Marcus.
Okay, so you gotta love the intro. It just gets me every time, and it gets me a little excited, but then also allows me to see a different side of our Scott Marcus.
Yeah. After the amount of time we've spent as roommates, there's no other side. You've seen it all.
Well, I don't think people listening realize that Scott might actually have a voice acting career ahead of him.
I got to thank our episode 1 guest, Jeff Bellinger, for finding that in me, as he had me do a voice on his most recent podcast.
Oh, my God. Yeah, you have to talk about that. So obviously Jeff was our first episode guest, but then I didn't realize that you were going to actually do a voice for his fun New England Legends podcast.
I had no idea either. One morning, I got a text bright and early. Scott, can you record 2 lines of dialogue and send it to me by tomorrow morning? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was an honor. He's had some of the biggest names in the paranormal world do voices for this. And he said,
what did you have to say?
So, here it is. He sent me the dialogue, and he sent me a little bit of the story. So I didn't really know too much about what the story itself was, except I knew that I played a New Hampshire police officer. So I said, crap, does that mean I have to do a New Hampshire accent? What is that?
Yeah, right.
So I researched it, and I spent a little time going down that rabbit hole of what do New Hampshireites sound like. And you know what? I'm gonna record it just my natural voice, but I'll also give an option where I try my hand at a New Hampshire accent. And he ended up using the one with the accent. So I guess I did all right. Well, let's see. My first line was over here, which is more like an over here. If you do it wrong, you start to sound like Sean Connery. But I was channeling the old man from the original Pet Sematary, the sometimes dead is better guy.
Oh my God.
But yeah, it's a really creepy episode on a true crime case out of New Hampshire where this girl was really, I mean, it was obviously a terrible story, so I won't even get into it. But there's this monument that's in the woods where they found her body, and that has led to kind of legends and lore because there's a school nearby. So it's kind of the dare for these grade school kids to go out into the woods to see this monument. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, it's definitely creepy. But getting back to our own intro, it's unique in the sense that we as writers are always trying to find what is our tone, what is our voice, what is the tone of our show supposed to be. So hopefully it hits that right level of campiness and creepiness, you know?
I think it totally does, because the first time you had me listen to it, I'm like, oh my God, I don't know if we can do this, but it's the right amount of ridiculous to get us into fantastic, because it's a little fantastic in terms of the intro. So nice work, Scott Marcus and his voice acting career. It's going to be shooting off like fireworks here pretty soon.
Just launch pad, yeah. What have you been up to lately?
Oh my gosh. Well, other than interviewing some amazing people for this podcast that we're just, pretty stoked about. I mean, just between Scott and I, we're just kind of texting each other every now and then, like, I think this might be kind of cool. What I'm up to is just kind of this daily grind of a lot of education. We've got all these things going on with International Screenwriters Association, bunch of events. We've got the Napa Valley Film Festival that we're going to be attending in November. Obviously, October is going to be a busy month just for general work. Scott's going to be all over the place for Halloween events, I'm assuming.
Oh, yeah.
But I think what I'm most excited about is Felicity Wren is the co-VP of development with our production company called Creative Screenwriter, but she's also the director of development for ISA. She and I host a Facebook Live broadcast called Wine Wednesday. I think we might have even mentioned this in the previous episode, but it's called Wine Wednesday. Felicity and I share a bottle of wine, and we just talk about screenwriting, writing in general, the craft overall, and some little medium or level or element of the Hollywood business. We every now and then have guests on, and it's on video. You can watch it on Facebook, but we're having a special guest the night before Halloween, and his name is Jim Hart. Every now and then you get to either hear an interview with somebody who wrote a movie that is like one of your favorite movies. It's pretty rare that you get to meet that person.
Mm-hmm.
And, Jim has been in association with, I guess you could say, the ISA, and he's done a bunch of events and stuff with us. He hosted or co-hosted an event where he dissected the script that he wrote, Bram Stoker's Dracula, that Francis Ford Coppola directed. Jim Hart has also written Hook, directed by Steven Spielberg. But for me, one of my top 10 favorite movies is Contact with Jodie Foster.
Yeah.
So I also wrote that. So he's going to be just a ton of fun. Felicity and I are just going to have a blast with him Wednesday, October 30th, 7 o'clock, LA time on the ISA Facebook page. But what's even more exciting, Scott, and I don't even know if you know this, because it's Halloween, we've got to share some ghost stories. And he came back saying, I have a great personal ghost story.
That is so cool. I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, I mean, the guy's a talker. Felicity and I probably won't even have to do anything or say anything. But I'm pretty excited about that. That's a regular thing that we're doing, every month, and we have been for, almost 3 years. And you can see the past episodes on the Facebook page, and you can go to the ISA page and look at the podcast tab, and we have a whole bunch of past audio versions of the broadcast on there.
Yeah, he's an amazing speaker. He's a very inspirational, motivational speaker as well. And when it comes to writing, really finding the power as a writer to say, hey, this show wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for me.
He's very famous for saying that writers and screenwriters especially are job creators.
Yeah, nobody has a job until you write the end. And that's when the story begins, I love that. Yeah, I've had the good opportunity to be able to hang with him a little bit in New York when ISA did an event out in New York. And I'll see him a little bit before you do, because we'll both be at the Austin Film Festival.
That's right.
And the days leading up to Wine Wednesday for you.
Yeah, good segue to what you have going on.
I guess one of the more exciting things lately is that we were just at the Menominee Paracon this old vintage theater. The Mabel Tainter Theater is the name of it, named in memorial.
Mabel
Tainter.
Okay.
It's a very unusual name. That's a last name. But yeah, Mabel Tainter was a 19-year-old girl who died young, obviously 19. And the family built this incredible theater as a memorial to her because she loved the arts. She loved music. And actually her piano is still in the theater, the one that she herself used to play. But it was the first year of this new paranormal conference, and we got to hang out with Grant Wilson, whom I've seen at a number of these other events around the country. Yeah, he's great. Exactly. Yeah, one of the guys that really started the whole phenomena of paranormal television. But also Travis Walton, who is mostly known as the guy who was the alien abductee that inspired the movie Fire in the Sky. Anytime you go to these events, they're really a lot of fun to connect with people, to meet new people that have that shared interest. But it's also this kind of fun little ecosystem where you end up seeing the same people sometimes at event after event and from city to city as you are all over the place. And one we have coming up, which is not a paranormal conference, but we'll talk about this a little bit in the episode with Mike Huberty, is I'll be down at the Louisville Imaginarium Convention, which started as a convention to celebrate book authors, but it has grown in the last several years and now covers all types of art, artistic creation and expression. Like even game designers are there and cosplayers. So it's really grown and become this big thing. But I'll be down there with Mike and my fiance, Wendy. We're doing this event where I'll be interviewing them on stage about writing songs based on ghost stories, and then they'll perform in between.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah, and Mike talks a little bit about that, and we'll get into, obviously, that interview, which is a ton of fun. Mike's just such a character, but just kind of talking about the convention world, it's needless to say how huge it is, just the world in general, how many different conventions there are. But if you are some form of a creative, listening to this, and you have something that could fit a niche audience, you got to look into these conventions because it's such a huge way to build an audience, to meet new people, to promote your work. I need to do that a lot more. Scott's so dedicated and you do this all the time, but it's just such a great opportunity, as geeky as some of them can be.
Well, yeah. Well, because they're specific, and that's what breeds the geekiness, because you can really do a deep dive if you're saying, hey, this is the really niche thing that I'm into. And it turns out, hey, a whole bunch of other people are into it too. Now we can really go down the rabbit hole together.
Well, it's such a targeted audience of people. I mean, they're actively paying, in terms of the audience members, the people that attend, they're actively paying money to come see you. You're in a way that you're like gaining possibilities in terms of sales and customers, and it's huge. Yeah.
It's really a lot of fun. And the Imaginarium Convention, I'll be doing a total of 5 panels while I'm down there. Most of the other ones are going to be about writing and about pitching. So all sorts of more screenwriting oriented panels.
Oh, cool.
But so, yeah, this one is one that casts a very wide net. So whatever your specific interest is in the creative world, you could probably find a panel that is exactly right for you.
You know, some of the people listening right now, maybe they chose this episode first. You know, they didn't listen to episode 0 or episode 1. We suggest that you would at least listen to episode 1 if you haven't listened to that. Jeff Belanger is our first guest. He's a longtime researcher from episode 1 on the show Ghost Adventures. And really, even aside from that, the guy's just an amazing storyteller. But just so everybody listening, if this is the first time you're listening, Scott is in the paranormal field. He's investigated a bunch of things. He did a documentary years ago, and he wrote a book called Voices from the Chicago Grave, kind of focusing on Midwest legends. And I am considering myself right here and now. Story expert. I work with writers one-on-one. I'm a consultant. I have my own consulting company called Story Farm, and I've created some online coursework and everything. So just everybody, listening has an understanding of where our background is and coming from. But on top of that, and one of the reasons why we started the podcast is because we have some really great, not only ghost stories to tell, but just we love wild stories, from alien stuff to archaeology. And, I just watched last night the most recent episode of Expedition Unknown with, one of our favorite people in the world, Josh Gates. Hint, hint, Josh, if anybody's listening that knows Josh, you can get him on. But he did a follow-up episode of our meaning Scott and I, favorite episode of Expedition Unknown called The Secret. So this is a follow-up on The Secret. So if anybody watches that show and you haven't watched Josh's most recent episode, it's just so fun. All right, so let's get into Mr. Huberty. How did you get involved with Mike? Wasn't it through a podcast that he had or something?
I mean, this is a whole origin story to why I'm getting married. Not to him.
That's right.
In general.
Yeah, right.
So I did a documentary on the lacrosse drownings, which we should probably do a whole episode on that in the future, because this is a really unique case and
amazing
unique storytelling.
You know what it is? It's a fantastic story.
Oh, well, there we go. So yeah, we actually should probably dedicate a whole episode to it, which would be easily done. So I did this documentary, and I am not very social media savvy, but for whatever reason, I sent out 2 press releases. One was to Coast AM, of course, like the creme de la creme of telling ghost stories on the radio.
Some of the best, yeah.
And I must have just done a Google search, and his podcast came up, his and Wendy's podcast, which is See You on the Other Side. And I said, hey, if you are looking for content, let me know. I just had a documentary come out, and he had me on the air about a week or 2 later. So that was the introduction. And then I didn't really know them at all after that. And about a year and a half later, boom, another one of these paranormal conferences that we're talking about. I attended the Chicago Paranormal Conference that Ursula Bielski puts on each year. And that's where I met Wendy the first time. And
this was when?
Almost exactly 3 years ago.
Okay.
Because of that. And then, so, the romantic side, we fell in love immediately and happily ever after. But the very next weekend was the Milwaukee Paracon, which Mike and Wendy were at, and they were performing at it. And so that was the first time I got to see Sunspot play as a band. I mean, Mike is a guy that really, he's very industrious. He's an entrepreneur. Mike and Wendy are both very driven, dedicated people. I mean, they're great musicians, but they also do this weekly podcast while they're also touring across the country sometimes. So people that really love to tell stories, really love to create, and just constantly do it.
I was going to say, and you fit in with that mold because they're always creating something, right? Not only just obviously the weekly songs, they're so active in terms of what else can we do? Because it's just coming from a source of fun. How can we just have some fun?
Yeah. And
Mike
another
turned that
thing
into a business.
Exactly. And then, yeah, that led to a tour company where he's got multiple tours across the Midwest, including basically in Max's backyard.
Almost literally my backyard. So and I didn't realize that until right before we were going to get Mike on. I had met Mike once before and obviously heard a lot about him just because Scott's friends with them, etc. I only vaguely knew he had a tour guide company and business. And, I knew he lived in Madison. And then just before we had him on, I'm like, wait a minute, you got one in Lake Geneva? And actually, I should kind of step back because you went on the tour in Lake Geneva and I didn't realize that was Mike's tour. So that was kind of the connection. For people listening to the first couple episodes, that Scott and I are from generally the same area in the country. I'm from Lake Geneva, Delavan, Wisconsin. Scott's from Mundelein, Illinois. We both do have this just fondness, if not love, for these little towns that we grew up in, Delavan being so weird. And then I just didn't really realize how many stories there are in Lake Geneva, which obviously he's filling an entire tour with these stories. Yeah. So there are plenty to tell. And it was just fun listening to what he had to say in terms of which stories were some of his favorites. The best one that, we're not going to give it away, about this woman in black who is said to roam, if you will, this lakefront park right in downtown Lake Geneva that everybody sees when they drive by. That's where the public library is, this teeny little library. And then, of course, the history behind how the park gets established is just fascinating. But then the fact there's a woman that just kind of roams around and makes people have weird experiences. And the fact that, she has this moniker of Woman in Black kind of gave me goosebumps, because that's what we call the woman who floats around our old house, the Woman in Black. So maybe there's some kind of Woman in Black society in the ghost world. I don't know.
Nice. Like the Red Hat Society.
Yeah. But no, it was just fun listening to Mike chat. I mean, what's your biggest takeaway from the back and forth with Mike?
I think it's just interesting that you find something that inspires you. Like for him, he started out in music, and he still is very much a music first person, but he's always had this interest in telling these kind of creepy stories. And so he's just found avenue after avenue after avenue of different ways to tell these stories, whether now it's live performance in the form of a tour company or the podcast, or continuing to write songs that are inspired by the creepy side of life.
I mean, obviously the stories that he told, and some in terms of some of the actual stories he tells on the tour. But I really enjoyed hearing about how the tour company came to be, and then what he had to do, like literal boots on the ground, just go from business to business and trying to plot out what's the easiest walking tour for people to be able to experience this. You have to account for elderly people who can't walk very far. Yeah. And it was just really things that I never even thought of. And then just the why behind he was doing these things. Obviously this level of I have to make a living, but he was matching that need, the financial need, with, well, I could work at McDonald's, but that doesn't mean anything. How about I start a tour company, and just kind of fell into his lap a little bit, but then he really worked hard to figure out how to organize this thing and make it the most enjoyable. He's kind of a natural performer, so I think that fits, of course.
I think that's an understatement for him.
Yeah, it is. I shouldn't say kind of, he is. I just thought that was really intriguing, going in and out of these places. And then it was funny to hear him say, if you randomly ask somebody, is this place haunted or anything? And the person's immediate reaction is, nah, not really. But I have seen 3 ghosts. It's like, wait a minute. Then it is,
It reminds me so much on my website, or sometimes it's on YouTube comments or whatnot. People will just go off against me saying, I've been to that location. It's not haunted. It's like, okay, because nothing happened when you were there doesn't mean it's not haunted. It's, what are you talking about? But one person got on their high horse about Fort Sheridan, and they said, well, I live in this place now. It's so not haunted. And it was just, I don't know why, like, they were filled with such anger. They said, however, one time I did walk into my living room, and it was like I slipped back in time, and I saw all of these people that weren't, like, what are you talking about? It's like one of the greatest ghost stories I've ever heard. Yeah, right. After you're saying the place isn't haunted.
Yeah. Why are you? Oh boy. I think people just have this immediate reaction to not real. I don't believe it. Why are you telling me this story? You're dumb. It's like this escalating defense mechanism or something. And then suddenly they take a step back and they're like, that's true. I might have been abducted by an alien a few years ago. And like, you're like, wait a minute. Okay, we need to kind of, let's just think about this. Yeah. And I think that's the point of what we're doing with this podcast, this idea of a fantastic story society where it's just, it's not this limited group of people, but opening it up to everybody and anybody, because we all have a fantastic story. It doesn't have to be that you have a haunting experience, even just some odd experience of the so-called supernatural in the woods, which Scott has a couple that are really just fun stories about some woods outside the Chicago area. Who knows if that means it's a haunting? But there are physical things that are scientifically proven to exist in the world that when you go there, you have just odd experiences you can't explain, even though some of the actual physics behind it might be explainable. That in and of itself is a fantastic story. So, yeah, that's kind of what we're trying to do here. And I think Mike, he paints such a fun visual picture when he's telling his stories, and it turns into this level of fantastic that's just, it's just fun to listen to.
He's a good storyteller, that's for sure. Always engaging.
Scott, though, ran a tour company in Los Angeles Hauntings. Am I right? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
I went on it. He brought a whole bunch of people on it. LA is a little difficult to walk, so it was a driving tour. But what if you had to pull one great story, your favorite story, which I think I might have an idea of which one it is, but which one? This can be our little fantastic story of our own this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And I ran this tour company for about 2.5 years, maybe, and gave this tour multiple times per week, every single weekend for 2.5 years. It was exhausting because I had a regular day job too. And so things sometimes did happen. And sometimes it was just really wonderfully connecting with the people that were telling their own stories while we were in the van, stuck in LA traffic together. But my favorite moment, I always loved when it was a smaller group, actually. I know it's not financially viable, but sometimes I'd get booked for a private tour where I only had 2 people on, and then we could really have conversations, and we could go some places that I couldn't go with the bigger group because there was a difference between driving around in my own truck versus renting a big 15-passenger van. There's a house up the hill behind Hollywood Boulevard called the Hollymont House. And it's on this small little mountain road, very, very narrow. I could not take a bigger vehicle up there. But if I was just in my own truck, I could pull up to it and tell the story about how in the 1970s, a UCLA student was at a party here. And in the middle of this party, all hell broke loose. Items started throwing themselves around the house. People were actually chased by items. They would run from room to room with some floating object in tow, as if it was thrown, but with the most wicked curveball imaginable.
Okay.
And even a story about a girl being pinned up against a wall by a chair, and the chair is held there by some unseen force. So this UCLA student is blown away by what the hell's going on here. So he goes and talks to Barry Taff, who you might know. He's made some appearances on some TV shows, most notably Ghost Adventures and Zach's Demon House movie.
Barry's amazing.
Yeah, he's one of the legends in the field. He really has been doing this for a long time. And at this point in time, UCLA had a parapsychology department, which I wish they still had, but alas, they don't anymore. So he told this fantastic story to Barry. And he said, well, I can't believe this, but I have to go follow up on it. So he goes and knocks on the door and explains, like, hey, I heard this story about your house. Can I come in? The homeowner welcomes him in. And while he's talking with the homeowner in the foyer, coins appear in midair and rain down on the two of them. They actually leave welts on the skin. They're coming down hard.
What the heck?
It's unbelievable. The homeowner said, I lived here for 7 years, and we knew the house was haunted as soon as I moved in, but it's just gotten worse and worse and worse, and I'm at the end of my limit here. I'm going to be moving, but you're welcome to come back as much as you want. Do whatever investigations you need to do. And Barry ends up coming back over and over and over again. The phenomena is happy to perform all the time. You know, it's always one of these, oh, it was so busy until you got here. Now it's quiet. Not here. Not here. One of my favorite stories is that Barry brings a priest to come and bless the house and see if that has any effect. And the moment the priest walks into the door, his hat disappears off of his head.
He just vanished?
Just vanishes. And so this house is known...
Here's your hat. What's your hurry?
Yeah. There's a paranormal phenomena called an apport, A-P-P-O-R-T. And it really means objects vanishing, reappearing, or just appearing, as we saw with the coins. It's one of my favorite stories, favorite types of hauntings, because it's physical. You know, so often you see or hear something, but no, this is actual physical objects moving around or disappearing and reappearing. And it's usually either a necessity item, like something you would absolutely know that goes missing, like your car keys or something like that. Like, I swear I put these right here, and now my day is shot because I'm going to spend the rest of the day trying to look onto the other side to try to find my car keys. Or it's a sentimental item. And again, something that you would know if it was moved or missing.
Well, what's come of the house since then? Does somebody live there?
So this is what's great. Well, first off, I'll finish talking about when Barry was there. Eventually the guy moves away, and Barry leaves a note behind saying, hey, to whom it may concern, future homeowner, this is my name, this is what I do. If you have any issues at the house, please give me a call.
Or run.
Yeah, exactly. And weeks go by, and Barry never gets any contact. So he thinks, well, maybe the activity was associated with the previous owner. I don't know, but nobody's calling me, so no big deal. Eventually, he gets a phone call, but it's not from the homeowner. It's from somebody else in the neighborhood asking why there is a cryptic letter to them that they found in their pantry. So not only does
this... hell?
So, yes, it's traveled to other houses. Objects have disappeared and reappeared elsewhere entirely. Oh, and I forgot to mention that when that priest finished his work, went back to his car. He decided to turn and give one last look back at the house, and that's where he saw his hat on the roof of the house.
What the heck? Like, this sounds like it's just made up.
Amazing stuff. And so in some of the research, they found that the house and the house next door were built at the same time by the same architect, and there's a tunnel connecting the two, and in that tunnel they found a headstone. They did an excavation. They did not find a body. But why would there be a headstone down here? And is that what's associated with the paranormal? We honestly don't have any clues at all.
Does it say, like, what does the headstone say? Do we know?
I mean, it's a woman's name. I want to say it's Mary. I'd have to look that up to verify it. But so because they see a name on it, they now associate it with this Mary, but who knows really what's going on there. So jump to
That is fantastic.
It's one of my favorite places, and I love to tell the story, and it's just so awkwardly located. It was hard to do on the tour, except this one time I had just a couple in my car, and I was up there. I was at the house telling the story of the house, and then somebody walks out of the house and takes a seat on the curb. I thought, well, this is kind of awkward. I'm talking about this house, and the person comes out that's residing in it, and she's sitting on the curb having a cigarette. I'm like, well, I gotta go up and talk to her. And I start to walk over to her, start to say hello. And this is just my own private truck. It's not like a company vehicle with a banner on the side or anything like that. And before I could get many words out, she says, yeah, it's still haunted. Oh, yeah. So she's waiting for a ride to take her to work, and she's working on Hollywood Boulevard at the Vogue Theater. I thought, you know what? I'm going in that direction. Hop in the truck. I'll drive you to work, and we'll talk about it. And
Brilliant.
Yeah. Oh, it was great. Because she said that, and it's so funny because the numbers are the same, that we've lived in this place for about 7 years now, and it's gotten more and more intensely haunted. And it's still objects moving, disappearing, reappearing. One of the stories that she told, she said she was getting the house decorated for a Halloween party. She changed all the bulbs in one of the chandeliers into red bulbs from white. And she walked out of the room, walked back into the room, and suddenly now all the bulbs are removed from the chandelier and placed in a perfect circle on the dining room table.
What the hell?
Wow. I guess they didn't like that decor idea. And then she had this other story where, again, it's a perfect case of an apport, because she said, I know this is silly, and she was almost a little bit embarrassed to talk about it, but she said, one of my comfort foods is champagne and gummy bears. If I'm having a really bad day, I'll just pop a bottle of champagne, have some sweet snacks, and I just feel better. And one day I always have that. That's something that I always have on hand just in case. And one day I had a really bad day, and it just wasn't there, and it's never reemerged. And then I told her the story about the note that vanished from one house and appeared in another one. I said, well, your neighbors might be enjoying your little treat right now.
Yeah, seriously.
But that's one of my favorite stories that came out of the tour, to be able to talk to somebody that lived in the place, and she verified that the same type of activity is still going on.
Well, where my brain goes, of course, it's like, all right, a haunting of a type, is obviously occurring from eyewitness accounts. Yeah. But then from what I've heard about the Hollywood Hills and some of these other houses, the house down the street from where, the Manson murders occurred, there really is, from a geological standpoint, a different energy. Like there's quite literally a physical,
a measurable, verifiable, natural energy. Yeah,
there is just a different type of gravitational pull, whatever you want to call it. I mean, I'm not a physicist, but
or a geologist,
or an expert on anything other than how to write a screenplay. But my brain goes to what's going on geologically and physically, on a scientific level, to then connect with the people that are in the house in terms of their energy. Because I look at all of these things as it's just energy, heightened levels, lower levels, positive, negative, not necessarily in terms of good or bad, but just literal positive, negative. So what is it that is in this little area that the house is built on? What's it connecting to from a material source? And then, of course, if there is anything spiritual going on, that's just interesting. So, we've used this word, I think, in every episode, but it's just it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And fantastic.
Yeah. And then, I think we can all, as we've established before, it's very easy to understand energy. and that vague concept, and maybe we can even misuse it to understand things, to help ourselves understand things. But the fact that, like, she changed light bulbs and then something removed the light bulbs means there's a consciousness there, that there's an awareness of the energy of whatever's going on there. So that's super unique.
Well, I think with that said, I mean, I think that's pretty much how we can just segue right into Mike. We can listen to some more fun, slightly scary and ridiculous yet fantastic segue music.
Release the hounds.
Release the hounds, and let's get into Mike. So everybody enjoy our interview with Mike, and you'll be hearing from us soon.
We are very excited to welcome a new member to our fantastic Story Society, Mr. Mike Huberty. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, gentlemen. It's nice to be part of such good company of people who love weird and wonderful tales.
Yeah, we'll send out your little badge that you can sew to your backpack here pretty soon.
And then we'll give you the step-by-step of the secret handshake and all.
That sounds good. I'm actually going to wear it on my jean jacket.
Oh.
If that's
right.
cool.
Well, we'll have to give you like a camo version of the badge.
Nice. It's going to go right under my Kiss Army back patch.
That's awesome. Yeah, we'll give you all the information about the high holidays and which capes to wear and all of that.
Excellent. No, I'm in, obviously.
So Mike is a lead singer and guitar player, bass player, I should say, on for the awesome paranormal rock group Sunspot, which, full disclosure, I am engaged to the drummer/violinist, Wendy. He also runs a podcast with Wendy called See You on the Other Side. You can find out more about that at othersidepodcast.com. In addition to that, he runs paranormal haunted history walking tours all across the Midwest. What's your origin story as a storyteller in general?
I've always been interested in artistic stuff. You know, when I was a kid and I used to think about like what I wanted to do when I grew up, first of all, I really had no idea, except I knew that I wanted to create in some kind of way. And so I would even say when I like even 8 years old or whatever, I would, when you run around and play something, I'd, if I created the story of if I was on a spaceship or something, I would envision myself not even in the story. I would just envision myself in the trailer of the story. And
Nice.
so I would think about like, okay, what would be the cool scenes in each part? Like what would be the greatest hits of this movie? You know, what would be the little bits be the most fun? And those are the parts that I'd act out and jump around. And then I'm like, oh man, I'd love to act in this trailer I'm in. Yeah. And then I pretty much wrote it. And you know what? Nobody else is going to understand this. So I'm going to have to direct it too. So like, I guess I probably always envisioned myself in the Sylvester Stallone model of, you know what? I want to create everything from square one and be involved in the process all the way through.
Well, what I love about that, just from a story brainstorming perspective, is that you had this natural tendency to move toward the most entertaining moments within an idea. And sometimes it takes writers and creators time to go, cool, I've got this great setup of a concept or whatever. And then they try to just go beat by beat by beat. And you just had this natural occurrence of, no, this is probably the coolest part. I'm going to just do that and then build a story around that. And hopefully for everybody listening who are writers, you can take that as a little piece of advice. But I mean, did you actually try to write these stories? Or?
I went through a few, wrote out, I had my mother's typewriter from the 1940s. And I did, try to bang out a couple of 1-page, 2-page scripts, but they all ended up being like pretty much copies of Star Wars.
Yeah, of course.
So it basically, I mean, J.J. Abrams made a career out of it, right? But I was basically just taking pastiches of things that I'd already loved, and I just put new like character names on it. And I mean, I guess Star Wars is a remake of The Hidden Fortress. So maybe I was tapping into my Jungian subconscious or whatever, and tapping into these archetypes of the world and things, and trying to find the story of the hero and everything when I was 7 years old and typing out stupid stuff on my mother's ancient typewriter.
Well, it's amazing that everyone, and I mean that almost literally, we have this natural tendency to just already understand story because we're just inundated by it. Even we literally have stories on our social media now,
Right.
Instagram stories. And so it's just, you're completely encircled by story. So how did you eventually get to this part of liking the, maybe for the lack of a better word, macabre or the spooky or, the paranormal? Was there a moment in your childhood that was like, wait a minute, I just experienced a ghost, or you just really like those stories?
Yeah, I was kind of curious when those trailers went from sci-fi to horror. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, pretty early on, my sister Allison, who actually started the Milwaukee Ghost Tour, she and I were always just watching shows like That's Incredible and In Search Of, things that were, paranormal documentaries almost. And it was just, like I loved horror movies, even as a little kid, even though I saw Night of the Living Dead when I was 6 years old. I still remember this was the summer. And because we were all staying up late, and it was on TV, and my sister and my dad were watching it, and they were laughing at it. This is maybe 1982. They're laughing at it because the special effects were so horrible, and it's black and white, and the acting is so histrionic. They're just laughing and giggling, and I am scared, scared to death watching this. And so, but I was fascinated with it, and so I thought about that every time we passed a cemetery. I'm like, well, okay, if the dead rise out of the cemetery and end up crawling out of the tombstones, how are we going to get away? Obviously, we're not going to go in the basement because that didn't work for them in the movie.
Nope. Yeah. Well, and it's funny because I wonder how different your experience of that would have been had your family not been laughing. Like, what if they were taking it seriously? You might have been scarred.
Right. Yeah, you'd still be catatonic.
Well, the funny thing is they're laughing at it, and they're laughing at me for being scared. It's because my sister was 13 at the time, and they're just like, "What? How can this be scary to you?" But remember, at the same time, I was really into Doctor Who when I was a kid, and Doctor Who's special effects are just above high school drama.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you're watching an episode of Doctor Who and you think that, these British guys were like in the 1970s were like, well, how much do we have for a budget? We've got £16. Okay. And then they just went and did it. But I was still enraptured because I thought the stories were really interesting and imaginative, and they captured my imagination. Just the horror, the depressing ending of Night of the Living Dead, like all those, spoiler alert if you haven't seen a 51-year-old movie, but all of those things combined to just like really, it turned me on to those emotions that horror can give you. And I became, fascinated with it. And I was always fascinated with real ghost stories and always, easily scared. I was, the guy that checked under his bed.
Sure.
So from a young age, I loved horror fiction, but I also was interested in, what are the real local legends? What are the real things? And it was really hard to find stuff for a long time, especially, I grew up in the Milwaukee area. It just didn't feel like we had that rich of a history. I know now, the Midwest has an incredibly rich and awesome history, even from just, the middle of the 19th century on, not even to go back to the legends of the American Indians and stuff like that. Sure. But just taking from, after Wisconsin became a state and Minnesota and everything, there's still so much in there, but most people don't know anything about it. That's one of the things when we do these haunted history tours across the Midwest. Part of it is making people feel more connected to their towns and making people feel more connected to their cities, and knowing that, like, 'cause everybody goes through civics class, like in 4th grade, and you learn about the governor and the legislature, and you might go to the Capitol, and you're like, this is stupid. This is like what adults talk about. And adults usually just talk about boring things all the time. So you see the politics stuff. But when you learn that the state capitol is haunted, you're like, oh, wait, what happened? There was
I want to listen. Now I want to learn.
Right. There's a huge fire that happened in the 1880s. And then there is someone that killed himself in the basement, and people still see him walking around the library down.
Is that
all
true?
Those, yeah.
Oh my God! All right, maybe we're jumping ahead. Keep going. Sorry.
Right. Okay. But I just mean those. So when you go there, like if they would have told me those stories when I was 10 years old, instead of just talking about this is where the governor signs bills, I would have been like, wow, government's cool.
Sure, yeah. So at what point, I guess, so you grow up, you've got an interest, and then you're in high school and college, and you're playing music and writing original music and touring a lot. At what point did you start to say, well, hey, these creepy stories that we're learning about just as a hobby, we could start to make this part of the business model, whether it's within the music or elsewhere?
Sure. It was funny because we would go on tour and we would find these, theaters, and theaters seems to have like more ghost stories than any other place. There are a million reasons why theaters could have that. It could be that actors are superstitious types, and so they're always seeing things that aren't there. Or it could be that there's hundreds of thousands or millions of people that pass through a lot of these theaters built in the early 20th century. You might have 1 million people have passed through there. So much energy and so much life and so much of something has happened there that it leaves its mark on the place, whether it's some kind of spiritual ectoplasmic energy, or it's whether just the energy of a performance that just gets left there. And
that's what I really think it is, that not only is there a performance going on, people are being entertained, but they're all collectively feeling something. It's emotion times however many seats are in that theater, times how many performances in its history. And also, I really feel that actors, it's their job to emote, to really tap into something and just to be so raw. They've got a very hard job, one that I don't envy at all. So I really think it's all of these things coming together, and it's really, to me, my theory is it's emotional energy.
Well, and when you think about the way the brain works, and this is one of the reasons why we enjoy horror movies so much, is because there's parts of your brain that do not realize you're watching fiction.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it elicits that kind of, a fight or flight response. It elicits these strong feelings that are all, they're subconscious, these primal urges we get when we watch films and see performances. And you think about, we're just ones watching it. If you're up there trying to emote something, especially in a play, and you are acting out the emotion, there's parts of your brain that don't realize you're acting out the emotion because they are responding and acting like you're really feeling. It's interesting. You say actors have a hard job to make it believable for us as the audience and to bring to life the things that we write. They have to feel some of those emotions themselves. I mean, of course, people get a little carried away in that, like I heard that John Bernthal on the set of The Punisher or whatever, like he would just stay in character all day and be unpleasant. He's like, you see him in interviews, he's like the nicest guy in the world. And he's like, I know on set I'm a jerk or whatever because I just stay in the character all day. But that's the only way that I can realistically portray the emotion.
So when he's going over to get a donut between takes, that's really the Punisher getting what the Punisher would look like getting a donut.
Give me the donut. It is. Of course, Laurence Olivier, I mean, what did he famously say to like one of the method actors that he was working with in the late 60s or whatever? He's like, have you ever tried acting, dear boy? The idea that, we're making this stuff up. It is a hard job because you want to bring these emotions that we write to life. So these theaters we play in, they always had some kind of haunted story. There would always be an urban legend or something associated with a lot of the places we played at. And so eventually we just started asking almost every place we went to, especially if it looked older or if it was an older theater or if it was a house or a mansion that was converted to a theater or a live venue. We'd say like, hey, do you guys have any ghost stories? We'd put them on we had a podcast at the time that was us with a video camera, going to different cities, playing, telling stupid jokes, getting drunk, having fun, living the life of a band, let's say.
Yes.
And then
this was about when you were 8 or 9?
It was, right. Yeah. So obviously we had really good fakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do that. We start collecting that, and it just started being that it was beyond just a passing interest then to where we'd be like, oh yeah, you guys have a haunted story. Let's go there. Let's take the camera, and let's to that haunted place and have you tell us the story on camera. We went on a longer tour one year and we came back to Madison. I had no way of making any money. We were going to take a couple months off or whatever while we were working on a DVD of our tour and things. And I'm like, I better figure out a way to make some money. And my sister, who had the ghost tour going in Milwaukee for a couple of years, she goes, you know what? You need to get something going in Madison. She's like, this was August at the time or whatever. And she's like, you know what? It's going to be Halloween season. And I bet you can get something going before Halloween. So I started walking around the different places around the Capitol Square in Madison, asking the bars about ghost stories. I'm like, hey, you guys, this place haunted? And some people were like, get out of here. And other people were like, you bet it's haunted.
Yeah.
And that they go through.
So how did they respond with the get out of here? Was that like a literal pick you up by the waist strap and throw you out?
No, I have been ejected from a bar that way, but not just asking those questions. Usually it was just like, nah, we don't have anything weird here. Yeah. It was more like a get out of here, not like, like they thought I was a Satan worshiper or something.
Yeah. Did you have to pull the story out of a few of them where they were like, I don't want to talk about it? And you're like, oh my God, I'm even more interested.
Yeah.
Yes, in some cases, because people would be like, not really.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
that means yes.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah, not really haunted. Like, what do you mean? And then all of a sudden they'd be like, oh yeah, well there was that time I did see, that Civil War soldier walking across the hallway. Yeah, I guess.
Outside of that, nothing much.
And then other places would be like, well, I've seen at least 2 ghosts, but you should probably talk to the manager because I think she's seen even more.
Yeah.
And like that
2
sounds
usually constitutes haunted.
Yes, I would say. So then you start collecting those stories, and it's the first part to hear people's, like, their experiences. And so you want to hear about their experience, like what happened to them, like what kind of things have they felt, have they seen? And then you want to get into what might it be. A lot of places have different, the people have different theories of who it is. At theaters, a lot of times, the go-to story is an actor who had killed himself inside the theater. That seems like every place, actors going to... Right.
Poor actors.
Usually hanging or jumping from a catwalk is my experience.
Yeah. Right.
Death by booze.
Yeah.
By alcohol.
And so they'll get into it and they'll tell them like, well, this person, usually it's a guy that had his heart broken or a woman that had her heart broken. And then because they're acting, they're dramatic type, they kill themselves by, like Scott said, jumping off the catwalk or hanging themselves in the dressing room kind of thing. And then people will start that with the kind of explanation of, well, we see the ghost of that actor. But then you have other places where it's like the guy that owned the theater, might come back and, people see like the owner of the place walking around, and that's kind of fun because that's a little less tragic. And also it's a little easier to connect because a lot of times suicides aren't in the public record. You're not often going to find, when you're doing historical research and you're looking in newspapers, a lot of times they'll say someone killed themselves, but they won't say the name.
Okay.
A paranormal guy by the name of Lauren Coleman. He's the guy that writes about cryptozoology. And if you've ever watched any Travel Channel show about Bigfoot, whatever, you'll recognize him. He's a silver-haired, silver-beard,
silverbacked. Yeah.
Silverback. Yeah.
He's a Bigfoot himself.
Right. That's how he knows so much about. And but so he was also in psychology as well as because suffice it to say, sometimes being a Bigfoot researcher doesn't always pay all the bills. Back in the 80s. Yeah, crazy, right? I was just thinking that being an adventurer would pay more. So back in the 80s, he was working on this idea of the suicide cluster. And that's where when one person kills himself, then other people hear about it. And then the idea gets put into their head like a virus. And so if people may have a predisposition or maybe depressed or things like that, it starts looking like a way out. And that's one of the reasons that a lot of newspapers don't talk about when people kill themselves. Is because
like
they
a
don't
safety
want
issue.
Yeah, they don't want to spread. I used to work in my first job after college was the morning director for a TV station in a nearby town. We had like 3 middle schoolers killed themselves within a month of each other. I mean, what a crazy in the same town. It was a poor town. I mean, that's exactly what Lauren Coleman was talking about when they were talking about the suicide cluster. People hear about it, and then they proceed to do it. And so that's why you're not going to find stories about, unless it's somebody who's famous, you're not going to find out about them killing themselves through the newspaper because they don't want to put that idea in other people's heads.
The fascinating things you end up learning when you're in this kind of work.
Right. I was talking to the news producer and I was like, oh my God, 3 kids. Like, should we do some kind of, awareness? Should we have maybe a special series on, if you see your kid might have these, have suicidal thoughts and things. And they're like, we don't report on that stuff. We don't want to give anybody else the idea. And they were worried about glamorizing the idea. So that's one of the reasons that when you're doing research about something, suicides are always an urban legend, but they're not always in, it's always harder to find them in the historical record. Whereas if it's the other thing that ghost stories feed on violent crimes, right? The idea that something horrible happens to someone and then their ghost comes back to take vengeance or to haunt the person that did something to them. Or, even worse, it's what I hate is there's a lot of ghost stories when, somebody gets murdered in a place and then the person that gets murdered is the one who haunts the place. And you feel like, man, that's gotta suck. because, you get killed violently and then your afterlife is just spent in that same place over and over again. Like you're getting punished for being a victim.
I kind of want to know your theories on the different types of hauntings. I know Scott and I have spent many hours talking about the various types, and I'm a firm believer in understanding of residual hauntings. Conscious hauntings are weird, where they're actually, you can communicate, and then all these other things like poltergeist activity, etc. Theories on that, or do you think it's a haunting?
As far as I always think there's a couple different types of hauntings. First of all, the idea of like you said, residual is more like a recording. So that's where we go into the idea that maybe some event happened that left its mark on a place. Just like, so the people who are listening to this podcast might be familiar that there used to be a thing called vinyl records, where people would take physical, records, they put them on a player, and then a needle would read the grooves in the record and throw out sound waves. The thing is about vinyl records is that it was a physical recording of audio. So when you played it, unlike a tape with a magnetic recording, vinyl was a physical recording of the audio in the grooves of the record. The idea is sometimes in a residual haunting that something happens in a place that physically marks the place in a way that the grooves in the record marked the sound waves. Under the right conditions, you might see Roman soldiers walking through a basement because 2,000 years ago, Roman soldiers walked on this field, and for some reason, it got saved into the earth, into the area, and now it's playing like your grandpa's record player. So it's not intelligent. It's like watching a videotape. You can't talk to a videotape, right. And it's not a soul or anything, or it's not back from the dead. It's just a recording of something that happened there. I've definitely heard of stories like that. It was funny when I was hiring people to work for our Madison tour, about 6 or 7 years ago. There was a couple who wanted to do it as a team. And the girl was really into ghost stories, and the guy wasn't. He did it so that he could make money for his truck or whatever. He was really into trucks. And he's like, oh, makes much money for my truck. I'm like, great. As long as you're good telling stories, I don't care. It's like, I don't really believe in any of this stuff. Well, except, so he was a kid, he lived in Florida, and a Civil War soldier just walked through his room.
Jeez.
And he's like, I tried to say something to him, I tried to touch him, whatever, but he just walked right through the room. That'd be the example of a residual haunting, a recording. That's
one of the things that really I love about it is you're able to look back in time. You're looking at a moment in history that's happened sometimes not long ago. Sometimes it's recent, but sometimes it could be very far back. You're seeing how it really was.
Right. And then some people also theorize that hauntings like that, they're not even recordings, but you are actually watching something happen live in that time period.
Yeah, that's what fascinates me. Because you just assume, well, it's a residual haunting. Well, then again,
maybe you are haunting the history. Maybe you right. Maybe your ghost has appeared there.
There is a theory of how time in the universe goes called the block universe. Before we get too far into the woods here, but let me just explain. That idea is that all time happens at once. We are experiencing it second by second as we travel through it. And the idea is the universe is a huge block. And when you think about the 3 dimensions, also everything that has happened, and we're just traveling through the block. In that idea, you can move around in time or see things that have happened at other points in time, but you can never change anything. The idea of the block universe is you can go back in time, but if you do go back, you can't change anything. You'll just have always been part of it.
It's all already happened, yes.
Right. So if all of time is happening at once, then I'm, sitting in my room in Madison, Wisconsin right now talking to you. Whoever was here, because this house may be 115 years old, right? So whoever was here 115 years ago, I could see them. The idea is maybe I would catch a glimpse of them. Something's happening in there. You're catching a glimpse of a different time. And so, people sometimes theorize that hauntings may be like that. There was a famous haunting in France, not necessarily, I shouldn't say a haunting, but there was a famous Fortean, Charles Forte is this writer who I encourage, if you guys are into fantastic stories, I encourage you to check out his Book of the Damned, and you'll realize that, people have been collecting these kind of fantastic stories for decades. And Charles Forte was collecting these stories in the late 19th century. And so our term Fortean is based on his name because he was the first one that collected and popularized a lot of real life weird stories that happen to people. And it's also his Book of the Damned is also a fantastic place for inspiration because he collects all these real life stories together, and it's often something weird, like a town where frogs came down as rain or something.
He's like the first Aaron Menke.
Yeah,
there you go.
So looking back at some of those, you can get really great inspiration for ideas and stuff looking at these old stories. And because he would collect them from newspapers, he would just sit in the New York Public Library and he would collect everything together for his book.
It's a great idea. If you're looking to brainstorm a screenplay or a movie or something, buy that book.
Yeah. And I mean, it's all available on the Gutenberg Project and stuff. So you guys can all check that out whenever. But it's fun to read. And also, it's easier than you think to read. Sometimes you think something's like 150 years old, like, oh, it's going to be a drag. It's not. I mean, think about Mark Twain's stuff is 140 some years old, still pretty easy to read.
Really?
Jane Austen's like 18 years old or whatever. And it's still very readable. Come on. They got Clueless out of Jane Austen, right? So you never know. You never know what kind of stories and older stories, public domain stuff, might spur your imagination. And then you don't even have to worry about stealing somebody's idea because it's in the public domain.
There you go. And you're going to always have your own voice behind it and your own take, your own interpretation. So you'll make it your own, even if you are inspired elsewhere.
Yeah. And coming full circle, Night of the Living Dead is in the public domain.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
you can videotape it off TV and just sell copies yourself. It's amazing about anything in the public domain. But going back, so the idea of the residual haunting, I wanted to say this story in France is about a guy that was walking through this Parisian park, and all of a sudden he found himself 100 years, in the past. And he was seeing outfits that were different. He was seeing the way people were getting around. The statues were different because it was 100 years before. And he thought, this is really weird. And he's walking around. And then when he comes out to the end of the park and he turns around, it's the present day again.
I love stories like that. There's some great ones like that. In Gettysburg, of course, Gettysburg has every type of ghost story. Ursula Bielski has written about some of the Lake Michigan Triangle. Apparently, there's kind of like the Bermuda Triangle. There's all sorts of weird stuff. And she includes some stories like that about time slips while you're out at sea, out on a sailboat, and suddenly all the ships around you are 100-year-old, like you said. And then you cut through the fog and you're back to present day. I love that kind of stuff.
Oh, man, I haven't seen this movie in forever. But do you guys remember the movie The Final Countdown? Not just the song by Europe.
I was going to say,
that's all I can think of.
The song. Yeah.
The Final Countdown is about an aircraft carrier that ends up, going through time, and they end up near Hawaii before Pearl Harbor.
Oh, awesome.
Interesting idea, yeah.
Yeah, it's from the early 1980s. No, it's a really cool movie, and I don't talk too much about it. I saw it when I was a kid, so like in my head, it's a really cool movie, but you never know how well it holds up. But it was really imaginative, and it's a really cool science fiction premise and a time slip premise, just like we're talking about. This idea you slip into the past, and what's so more, you were always there.
Yeah, well,
it goes with that idea that, you can't change the past. You're always there as part of it.
The Spaceballs pretty much summed it up with everything that's happening is happening now. Remember when they're looking at the monitor? What happened to then? When? Just now.
As writers, we're always thinking about, in terms of writing a book, writing a blog maybe nowadays, and of course writing TV and film. But you took this idea that started with Allison, your sister Allison, and you wrote a tour that apparently went well. We can talk about the beginning of that, but also when did the moment come that you thought, hey, I could franchise this out, and I don't need to be the one that leads all the tours, but I could still be the one that writes all the tours and then manages them. So let's talk about that evolution a little bit.
Sure. I did it every Friday and Saturday and Sunday, and then the TV station came because I sent out press releases. And so I got a couple of profiles on local news, and that helped sell some tickets.
What year are we talking here, by the way?
This is 2010.
Okay, so the ghost shows have been out. The paranormal is in the pop culture, which has got to be helpful.
That, and I'd been on these haunted tours in different cities, and so I knew what they were like, and I knew what kind of possibilities there were. When my family would go on vacation, we would take the haunted history tour. No matter, we'd always make my parents buy us tickets to the haunted history tour, and then now I do that to my wife. Is that I'm like, oh yeah, we get out to take the tour,
it's and I would expense.
Yeah, that's right. It's deductible, baby. And we did, but also it's a great way to get cool ideas, or you see what different people are doing. You see how different people dress up. You see how different people tell the stories, how they structure things. It is valuable to, that when I was working on the route in Madison, I was thinking, well, how far do I like to walk? And if this
Yeah.
person is going to, if you're taking around somebody who's 70 years old, can they walk for 2 miles? How fast can they go? How far can they go? You keep that in mind to try to make things as comfortable as possible. And you think about your audience and how they're going to be watching it. So when you're writing something, if you're writing a screenplay, a lot of times you might put in the stage directions, and that's exactly the same way you put together a tour, because you're like, are we standing in front of the building? Are we standing to the side? What part of the street? Is it a loud part of the street? Keeping the context of how your work is going to be viewed and how it's going to be consumed in mind, it helps you put together a better experience for the viewer or the tour taker or the listener or anything like that. And by doing that, the more satisfied people you get, the more people you're going to get paying attention to you and then, wanting some more of that. And so Madison ended up being pretty successful right off the bat. Besides little business stuff, and I had no idea how to run a business, and then I had a partner that screwed me, and all the stuff
growing
that happens.
pains, we'll call
right.
it. Yeah,
Totally growing, growing legal pains. But you go through and you do it,
Okay.
and then you come out on the other end. And my wife accepted a job in Minneapolis for a couple of years after we got married. We moved up to the Twin Cities for a while, and we were living right downtown in Minneapolis. And it was right along the Mississippi River. And, I go running there and walking in these beautiful parks and really cool places. I'm like, well, they have to have a cool haunted history tour down here. Nobody had anything.
Oh my God.
There was and this is in 2.5 million people in there. So this is not a tiny town or something where there's not a business happening. So I was like, well, all right. Well, if nobody else is going to do it, then I'm going to do it. And so I did the exact same thing I did in Madison. I started walking around places, talking to people, and then collecting the stories, going through history books, going into the library, going to the historical society, and finding whatever I could, whatever was something weird. And, this is something too, if you guys are looking for inspiration for fantastic stories, most historical societies will have a weird file. They'll have
Nice.
a paranormal file. They'll have somewhere where they collect the ghost stories that the local newspapers will run around Halloween. They collect reports of UFOs, because there's usually somebody who works at the Historical Society that has a little bit of an interest in it.
yes,
And they'll keep all that stuff together. And usually when you're the one who goes and asks for it, you're like the first person in 15 years that'll ask for it. So they'll just talk you up like, oh, yeah, no, I got this one. It's 1975. And they'll go into the whole thing, and you'll get more you'll get more details about it than you can imagine. So it's a great way if you're looking for inspiration for fantastical stories and you're like, well, all this stuff has been done before. There's a lot of things that you can use as a launching off point that you can find. And it's in your. There's plenty of inspiration in your town, probably even wherever you're from.
So I have to ask, I'm a Delavan, Wisconsin native. My parents live in Lake Geneva now. I need to get some juicy bits about Lake Geneva. And everybody who's listening, if you don't know where Lake Geneva is, about an hour and a half north of Chicago, southeastern part of Wisconsin state. It's kind of like some people call it like the Hamptons of the Midwest. I think that's an extreme compliment. But
Billy Joel does get DUIs here as well, right?
Billy Joel. There are a lot of people, famous people that owned houses on the lake. Michael Jordan had a house there. The Guns N' Roses owned the Stone Manor for like 4 months and then got kicked out.
Oh, yeah. Well, they used to have an awesome recording studio in Lake Geneva where the Playboy Club was.
Yeah, the Playboy Club was where the Grand Geneva Resort is now.
Right. And then in the 1980s, it became a recording studio. And so a lot of these gigantic mansions were built in Lake Geneva after the Great Chicago Fire, because famous rich people, the Maytags and the Wrigleys,
like titans of industry kind of people.
Yeah. The Murdochs, of the 1870s, they built mansions in Lake Geneva for vacation. But after the Great Chicago Fire, when they lost a lot of their main houses, they expanded on the mansions up in Lake Geneva, and a lot of times they would live there full time. It became this beautiful place. Hugh Hefner developed a Playboy Club up there, and after the Playboy Club closed down, then it became a recording studio, and it was also a place where bands could stay after they played at Alpine Valley, which at the time was the largest outdoor music theater in America.
Yeah, it's still amazing.
Yeah, it's still monstrous. They don't have as many shows there as they used to, but it used to be like the Grateful Dead would be there every summer when they had like the Monsters of Rock. That they have it at Alpine Valley, and I mean now that stuff's been taken care of. Like in the Chicago area, they do Lollapalooza. In Chicago, they don't drag everybody up to Wisconsin for it, but the artists would stay at the old Playboy Club and sometimes they would record things at the recording studio there in the 1980s and early 90s. And so a lot of cool albums were done, like Skid Row did their debut album there. I know Ozzy did some stuff there. Like a lot of cool things were done in that I growing up 20 minutes away, I had no idea that Lake Geneva was as cool as it was.
I had no idea.
For that kind of thing.
I was 9 minutes away.
Yeah, I see Cheap Trick, who of course is from Rockford, but Queensryche, Iron Maiden, Nine Inch Nails even. Not some names you would expect to see up in a resort town. Right. I do want to say AmericanGhostWalks.com is the website. And one of the reasons we're talking about Lake Geneva right now is that among the many other cities, Mike does have a Lake Geneva ghost tour there. So, Mike, do you want to just go over really quickly where you have your locations? And we can get back to talking about Lake Geneva as well.
We run them in Madison, Wisconsin, Wisconsin Dells, Wisconsin, Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. We're running right now Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Waukesha, Wisconsin, which my co-host and drummer, Wendy, and Scott's fiance is the ghost hostess in Waukesha. We also run them in Stillwater, Minnesota, St. Paul, Minnesota, and Minneapolis, Minnesota. So we currently have 8 cities, but we're looking at expanding even more because there's a lot of places where there is untouched ghost stories that I think people would really enjoy it. And so we're always looking for new cities where we can, find ways to introduce. The thing is, it is a lot of history, but it's the interesting parts of history. But also, in the history, let me tell you a little bit, so you were wondering some stuff about Lake Geneva. And this is one of the stories that I kind of, we put together while, doing the research and getting the script together. This was something that required some investigation because I first heard about this woman in black that people would see in the public park that's right next to the lake and right by the public library in Lake Geneva, Elm Park. And
so I have to, full disclosure, I just took this tour a couple of weeks ago, and this one was just chilling is the only word I could use to describe this story. So
really?
I have to already endorse it.
This is my hometown. I don't even know this story. I mean, there was a woman in black floating around in the house I grew up, but...
Oh, awesome. I don't know if it was the same woman, but she might have gotten around. But,
yeah, right.
But I first started seeing online that people were talking about, I saw the woman in black in the park. So right by the Lake Geneva Public Library, the park was gifted to the city by the Sturgis family in 1894. And in the 1860s, George Sturgis, he worked at the Northwestern National Bank in Chicago, and he was the son of Solomon Sturgis, who was one of Chicago's early business leaders. So he was part of Chicago royalty. To show you how small the bank was back then, according to a book, The History of Chicago, Volume 3, George was the cashier at the bank until his brother Stephen retired. And when Stephen retired, George became the president of the bank. So that's the family business. He marries a woman named Mary Delafield in 1862, and they live at the mansion that his father built in Chicago with their children. They go to Lake Geneva every summer on vacation. But then the Great Chicago Fire happens in 1871, and their mansion burns to the ground. So they decide to leave Chicago, come up to Lake Geneva full time. They buy a cottage on the property that eventually becomes the park. And then they purchased the 5 surrounding properties. And they and their 8 children lived there in their house for a few years. And they built a proper mansion in another part of the lake. And so George dies in 1890, and he leaves his wife in charge of the whole estate. And in 1894, she donates the property to the city of Lake Geneva with the stipulation that it's used as a library and a public park. And she said she wanted everybody to be able to enjoy the lake, not just the wealthiest citizens. So that's why it had to be public. And also, she's a suffragist, right? So she has a stipulation that the board of the library be comprised of a female majority.
Ha.
So
that's awesome,
right? So she's leaning in 1894. Her family's famous around the turn of the 20th century, and but most people today have never heard of them, because they kind of, the kids get married off and things, and they don't own a store or anything like that, and their name is not on the bank, so they kind of fades away into Chicago history. What I first heard about it was that a woman and her husband are visiting from Chicago. They decide to have a picnic in this park. And as they're in the picnic, The husband's sitting at the base of the tree, and his wife is sitting down facing him. She reaches over him to get a soda, and she noticed that his eyes grown wide and his face turned white. He points to something behind her, and she turns around. She sees a woman dressed in all black in 19th century clothing standing behind her. Black stockings, black lace-up boots, and a long-sleeve dress that had black lace over it. In addition, she wears a wide black hat as well as black gloves. Now, okay, so you're thinking, all right, did the Cure concert just let out? But the first thing the woman thinks is like, why is he wearing these clothes? It's 80 degrees outside. You know, she was wondering if there was some kind of historical recreation going on. And she turns around to her husband, but he's just sitting there, his mouth is agape. All right, well, I guess I better turn around and see what this woman wants. And she turns around and tries to say something to her. And the woman in black responds, but the witness says it sounded like the woman's voice surrounded her head, full of air and wind, and the gist of her message was that the woman was special. Which might be true because no one else at the park seemed nonplussed about a woman dressed in black 19th century clothing. Mm-hmm. So the witness describes the woman bending over so that their faces come close to each other. The next thing she remembers is she's standing on the other side of the park with no idea how she got there. She runs back to find her husband sitting under the tree, and she asks him what happened. He said that she had walked away with a quote-unquote green lady, and he asked if she should come along, but the woman shook her head when he did. And they walked away, talked to each other. The woman has no recollection of what they discussed or why she walked away. Other people have reported seeing this woman in the 19th century clothing in the park all the way back to the 1970s. And some people even say that depending on what you're doing, she'll follow you as you walk around the park. We tell that story and we connect it to Mary Delafield Sturgis because it was her property. She's the one who said it needed to be a library. You know, this is where you take people's tales of what their experiences, and then you connect it to the most famous person who had lived in the place, who had worked in the place, who might have a reason to watch over the people in the place. Mm-hmm. And so It's funny enough, there's people that have taken the tour who are from Lake Geneva, and they said, oh my God, I saw that woman here, and I thought it was a play, or they thought somebody was playing dress up, or it was like a steampunk thing. You know how people like to people have said that, you know, to our Lake Geneva guides that, yeah, I saw the woman in black here too.
Not even knowing it was a specter.
Right. Somebody walking
but there's
around
nothing negative about her. It's not like she's
what's
scary.
weird, it's the fact that people get lured away sometimes by the hand and they don't have any memory of it until they snap out of it in a different location. That's what's really creepy to me.
Yeah. It's little things like that, okay? So you find a couple stories here and there, and you find someone who wrote up their entire story, or you talk to someone who's seen them, and then you find the history with it, and then you synthesize everything and you know, put it all together. You know, in Minneapolis, what I think is probably like our most gruesome story that I thought, on the Mississippi River, they have the ruins of a mill that exploded in 1878. They call Minneapolis the Mill City, and like General Mills was based up there and everything. Because that was its main business for a long time. In 1878, one of the mills explodes in a huge fireball. It throws the roof of the mill 500 feet in the air, and 14 men who were working in the mill when it exploded were killed, and the fire spread to 2 different nearby mills that also exploded and killed 4 more people.
Jeez.
So eyewitnesses reported as a stream of fire pouring out of the windows. The Minneapolis Tribune says that Minneapolis has met with a calamity, the suddenness and horror of which it is difficult for the mind to comprehend. So rumors spread that it might be an earthquake, gases generated by the milling process, or even there was a train car loaded with nitroglycerin. But the real truth was mill work creates a fine dust that's always in the air. It's like an indoor fog that's highly flammable and explosive. And so a couple of millstones dry, rubbed together, created a spark, ignites the flour dust that's in the air, and then it's just a firestorm because the air is flammable inside the mill. There's a park there called the Mill Ruin. It's a cool looking place because it looks like it still exploded last week. So they've kept the stuff from the mill there, and you go there and you can read about the history, and that's really about the history of the town. But the thing is, those 18 people that had died, there's a monument in a nearby cemetery that was erected in 1885. But the thing is that nobody found their bodies because they exploded.
Jeez.
You know, when I was looking into, I'd heard people say they saw, shadows walking amongst the mills. People will hear weird footsteps in the ruins. They'll feel like they're being watched. The usual stuff with a haunting. But this is one of those things where when you read enough books about something, you can find something that is just grotesque. And so I'm going over all these different books to see if there's anything, details that I can get about the explosion of the mill to make it more interesting for the tour. I find an eyewitness account who said that he saw bits and pieces of flesh rotating in a vortex, like in the firestorm, like he saw after the explosion. It looked like a miniature tornado of human parts.
Oh my gosh.
Good
And
Lord.
he called them, he's like, I saw the bits and pieces. A rotating vortex of flesh and bone that moved slowly across the ruins. And he said it even paused and like more flesh like leapt from the ground into the column.
Oh my gosh.
Well, I think this then answers the question we were going to ask you, Mike. What's the best ghost story you know that nobody knows?
Right. And he didn't talk about it at all. This eventually made it into a book about the history of Minneapolis. He tells his children about it late in life. And so it's not until he's much older that he tells his kids about the horror he witnessed of the phantoms who wanted to be put back together.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
And that's the kind of thing where, I don't know if you guys ever seen From Beyond. Stuart Gordon, that's his sequel to Reanimator, if you guys ever seen Reanimator.
Okay.
And I love Stuart Gordon because he's a University of Wisconsin alumni. Obviously, he's a Chicago native, and he put together the Organic Theater with Joe Mantegna and everybody. And so, but Stuart Gordon, like they were putting together H.P. Lovecraft plays at the Organic Theater, and then that's how he got the budget to create Reanimator. And then for a second movie, From Beyond, he creates a flesh monster at the end of it. And when I read this story, all I could think of was the flesh monster from the ending of From Beyond, and how there's a real story now to go with that visual. From Stuart Gordon's horror film. You do enough digging, and this bits and pieces monster that could be the basis of a horror film. What if you changed the Great Mill Disaster to, instead of it being the millstones dry, rubbed together, and creating the spark that ignites the flour dust, what if somebody does it on purpose? And then the monster's got to come back and take revenge on him or whatever. There's a million ways to then go back in, give it some human kind of motivation. Why something happens could be accidental, but all those people died. That doesn't mean they don't want justice, kind of thing. And there's little things when you go into the historical record and you're finding these ghost stories. First of all, it makes it the fact that people believe these things happen to them, and I don't know, we always say with our ghost stories, we're like, well, I can't tell you if the stories are true, but we can tell you the people who told us the stories think they're true, or the people that it happened to believe them.
I love it. That's really what we're doing with this podcast is reminding people, and we say it at the end of every episode, that there are fantastic stories around you everywhere. You just have to search for them. And I think you're a perfect example, Mike, that if you just do some digging, you do some reading, you really, don't necessarily force a story to come. You just go and look for some fantastic stories, and they're going to show up. And you've made a business out of it.
Absolutely. And we don't even get to delve into the fiction part of it. We feel that we have to tell the truth as much as we can, or, according to the book or according to the newspaper. We don't elaborate, let's say. But if you're coming in there and you're trying to
sometimes.
Right, exactly. But if you're coming in there and you're writing a great script and you're working on something, there's so much ways where you can take a real story, just as the spark of inspiration, and turn it into human drama, and the interaction and the motivation and all the stuff that can go with it can take the genesis of an interesting, 3-paragraph story that you get out of a book or a newspaper or something, and turn it into 90 minutes of entertainment that can really move somebody.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to develop it and continue to grow it to fit the story that you want to tell. Even genre not specific. It can start with a horrific thing, and then you put a romance in front of it somehow, but just finding that inspiration, that spark of an idea, no pun intended on the word spark.
Well, think about stuff that starts off as a science fiction film, like The Time Traveler's Wife, or something like that, where what gets you interested is the conceit of the time traveler and the person that has to have a relationship with him while he's going through time and things, and meeting her at different points in her life. And then that's the science fiction conceit that gets you into it, but it's the romance that makes you feel something when you get to the end. And so it's, these fantastic stories, a lot of times the hook is the fantastic part, but it's the basic human experience that makes the story as powerful as it can be.
It's the characters. The characters drive the story totally. And I think
unless you're talking about Lost, because if you're talking about Lost, it wasn't about the characters, it was about the mysteries. So don't give me that.
Yeah. I'm already planning on having you, or we are already planning on having you back to talk more about the music side and adapting some paranormal concepts or dark concepts, all sorts of different concepts into music, into songs. On that note, we do have to give you a quick congratulations for finding your way from Puerto Rico to the Chupacabra to a recent episode of Expedition Unknown. So that's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, your song was on the show. I love that.
Yeah, that's a really special treat.
And we will actually be talking about your songwriting process and how you take these ideas with Wendy and make great music out of it down at the Imaginarium convention down in Louisville. That is coming up in middle of October here.
October 11th, we'll be talking about making music with ghost stories.
Yes.
And that's Friday. It's going to be in the Grand Hall on the stage. And Wendy and I will be talking about how we put together our songs from paranormal topics, a lot of times inspired by real stories like the kind we were talking about today, and put them into like a musical format where we can express some of those same type of ideas through melody and lyrics instead of just regular storytelling.
It's great. It's all writing and storytelling in all sorts of different forms.
So thank you, everybody, for listening. Obviously, Mike, I think you're a perfect example that, like I said earlier, there are fantastic stories around us everywhere. We just have to search. And, for everyone listening, the Fantastic Story Society is going to be able to help find those stories for you.
AmericanGhostWalks.com if you want to take one of these ghost tours throughout Wisconsin or Minnesota. Sunspot Music and Sunspot Universe is a good place to go to hear more of the music that Sunspot is doing. And of course, the See You on the Other Side podcast is a weekly podcast that touches on all things and that intersection of pop culture and the paranormal. Highly recommended. Completely biased, but completely recommend it too. But getting back to songwriting, Mike, is there a certain song that you might want to share with our listeners and talk briefly about what that inspiration for the song was?
I think a pretty easy one that a lot of people will be familiar with, at least the concept, is you guys have probably all seen at least one episode of Ancient Aliens. And if you haven't seen Ancient Aliens, then you've probably seen the meme of the guy with the crazy hair, Giorgio. And in the meme, it says, "I'm not saying it was aliens, but it was aliens." Right. Giorgio is actually the protege of an author named Eric von Daniken, who really popularized the idea of aliens kind of meddling in human history in the late 1960s with his book, Chariots of the Gods. And when we talk about inspiration, Chariots of the Gods is one of the books on my parents' bookshelf. And I'm not even sure if they even read it. You know what I mean? But like it was there and I took it out, and reading it as a little kid, this idea of a science fiction element in human history. It's the idea, history is of real stories, but also there's a strange layer over the top. In our song, the Sunspot song, Chariots of the Gods, we try to, get towards that emotion of, we really have a lot of, basic human feelings of sometimes you're disappointed in your life, or sometimes you hate your family, or things like that. But the idea that there may be something better out there, or you may come from some kind of different stock, can be inspiring and help you, help you through a hard time, or help you through when you can't stand your family or something. And that's kind of where we go to with this idea. That was the taking off point of the theme of our own version, Chariots of the Gods.
Sad little one doesn't want to feel alone. She hates the trash that spawned her. She hates a broken home. She likes it when I say aliens made Homo sapiens. She likes it when I talk Martians and the chariots of the gods. The blood of the unearthed me better than the blood of the ugly. Bred for more than just civility. Bred for more than this burned out hole.